She felt the fabric tear before she heard the laughter, the designer dress splitting down her back as champagne soaked through to her skin. The CEO's girlfriend stood over her with a smile that could cut glass, eyes gleaming with satisfaction as the entire VIP lounge went silent. Nobody knew the waitress they were humiliating was married to the man who owned every building in this city. And when he walked through those doors in exactly 3 minutes, every person who laughed would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. What would you do if someone humiliated you in public, not knowing who you really were? If you want to know how one ripped dress changed everything, let's go back to the moment it all began. Elena Martinez pressed her palm against the silk fabric of her dress, checking one last time that the borrowed waitress uniform fit properly over it. The Grand Azure was the most exclusive private club in Manhattan, perched on the 74th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering cityscape. She had agreed to help her friend Sophia cover a shift tonight because Sophia's daughter was sick, and Elena couldn't say no to someone who had once helped her through her darkest days. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was wearing a $4,000 dress beneath a polyester uniform, carrying champagne to people who would never look twice at her face. Her wedding ring sat in her clutch in the staff room, a 20-carat diamond that would have caused questions she didn't want to answer. Nobody here knew who she was. Nobody knew that the quiet woman with the tray was married to Lucas Ashford, the billionaire who had bought and sold half of Manhattan before he turned 35. She moved through the VIP lounge with practiced grace, her ballet training from childhood making her steps nearly silent on the marble floor. The room buzzed with conversation, expensive perfume mixing with cigar smoke and the sharp scent of top-shelf liquor. These were the people who controlled industries, who made decisions that affected thousands of lives over dinner and drinks. "Excuse me." A sharp voice cut through her thoughts. "This champagne is warm." Elena turned to face a woman who couldn't have been older than 25, draped in Chanel and dripping with diamonds that looked real but probably weren't. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face, and her lips were painted the color of fresh blood. "I'll get you a fresh glass immediately," Elena said softly, reaching for the flute. "Don't bother." The woman waved her hand dismissively. "Just bring a new bottle. And make sure it's actually cold this time. Do you even know what temperature champagne is supposed to be served at?" Elena felt heat rise in her chest but kept her expression neutral. "Of course. I apologize for the inconvenience." As she turned to leave, she heard the woman mutter to her companion, "The help these days. Absolutely useless." The companion laughed, and Elena recognized him immediately. Marcus Chen, CEO of Chen Industries, a tech empire that had been trying to merge with one of Lucas's companies for the past 6 months. Lucas had told her about Marcus over breakfast last week, describing him as ambitious but reckless, someone who valued appearance over substance. Elena retrieved a fresh bottle from the service bar, making sure it was properly chilled, and returned to the table. She poured carefully, the golden liquid cascading into crystal flutes without a single bubble escaping incorrectly. "Finally," the blonde woman said, not even glancing at Elena. "Marcus, darling, you were saying about the Ashford deal?" Elena's hand stilled for just a fraction of a second, but she caught herself and continued pouring. "It's falling apart," Marcus said, swirling his whiskey. "Lucas Ashford is impossible to work with. Too demanding, too controlling. Thinks he can dictate every term because he's got money." He laughed, the sound ugly and sharp. "Someone needs to teach that man that he doesn't own the world." The blonde woman, Elena assumed she was Marcus's girlfriend, leaned closer. "I heard his wife is some nobody he married out of pity. Probably a gold digger who got lucky." The champagne bottle nearly slipped from Elena's fingers. She tightened her grip, her knuckles going white against the dark glass. Every instinct screamed at her to speak, to defend herself, to tell them exactly who she was. But she thought of Sophia's sick daughter, of the promise she'd made to help, and she kept silent. She finished pouring and stepped back, but as she turned, her shoe caught on the edge of the plush carpet. She stumbled forward, and the empty champagne bottle tilted in her hand. A few drops of champagne splashed onto the table, missing Marcus but landing dangerously close to the blonde woman's clutch. "You clumsy idiot." The woman shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. Do you have any idea how much this bag costs? I'm so sorry, Elena said quickly, reaching for a napkin. Please, let me. Don't touch anything. The woman's voice rose, sharp enough to cut through the ambient noise. Conversations around them began to die down, heads turning toward the commotion. You've done enough damage. Marcus stood as well, his face flushed with anger or alcohol or both. This is unacceptable. Where's your manager? Elena felt every eye in the room on her. Her face burned with humiliation, but she kept her voice steady. I apologize sincerely. It was an accident. If there's any damage, the club will of course cover. The club? The blonde woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You think I care about what the club will pay? Do you know who I am? Who we are? I understand you're upset, Elena began, but the woman cut her off. No, I don't think you do understand. She stepped closer, invading Elena's space, her perfume overwhelming and cloying. People like you are so careless because you have nothing to lose. You drop things, spill things, ruin things, and then you just apologize and move on. Well, not this time. Elena wanted to step back, but pride kept her rooted in place. She had faced boardrooms full of hostile investors with Lucas, had stood beside him as he dismantled companies and rebuilt them. She would not be intimidated by a woman throwing a tantrum over a few drops of champagne. I've apologized, Elena said, her voice quieter now but with an edge of steel beneath it. If you'd like to speak to management, I can arrange that. Oh, I'll do more than speak to management. The woman's eyes gleamed with something cruel and triumphant. I'm going to make sure you remember this night for the rest of your pathetic life. Before Elena could react, the woman reached out and grabbed the shoulder of Elena's uniform. The fabric was cheap, meant more for appearance than durability, and it gave way immediately. The sound of tearing cloth was obscenely loud in the now silent lounge. But the woman didn't stop at the uniform. Her perfectly manicured nails caught the delicate silk of Elena's designer dress underneath, and she pulled hard. The dress, the beautiful, expensive dress that Lucas had bought for her last birthday, the one she'd worn to a gala where they danced until midnight, tore down the back, exposing her bare shoulder and the curve of her spine. Elena gasped, her hands flying up to hold the fabric together. Shame and shock flooded through her in equal measure, hot and overwhelming. She heard laughter, saw phone cameras lifting, and felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Oh my God, someone whispered, and Elena wasn't sure if it was sympathy or mockery. The blonde woman stepped back, examining her work with satisfaction. Maybe now you'll think twice before being so careless around your betters. Marcus was laughing too, his face red with amusement. Jessica, that was harsh. But hilarious. Jessica. The name would be burned into Elena's memory forever. Elena stood frozen, holding the torn pieces of her clothing, feeling utterly exposed in a room full of strangers. This wasn't her world. Or rather, it was her world, but she was seeing it from a completely different angle now. She had stood in rooms like this 100 times wearing couture and confidence, but now she understood what it felt like to be dismissed, to be treated as less than human. Someone should really teach the staff here some basic competence, Jessica said loudly, addressing the room now. It's embarrassing, honestly. This is supposed to be an elite establishment. I couldn't agree more, a deep voice said from across the room, and Elena's heart stopped. She knew that voice. She knew it the way she knew her own heartbeat, the way she knew the sound of rain against windows or the ocean against sand. It was the voice that whispered good morning to her every day, that told her she was beautiful even when she felt ordinary, that had promised to love her forever. The crowd parted, and Lucas Ashford walked through the VIP lounge like he owned it. Which, Elena suddenly remembered with a jolt, he did. He owned the building. He owned the club. He owned half the businesses represented in this room. / He was wearing a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, his dark hair slightly tousled as if he'd been running his hands through it, his gray eyes scanning the room with the cool assessment of a predator. When his gaze landed on Elena, something flickered across his face. Recognition, rage, love, all compressed into a single heartbeat. Then his eyes moved to her torn dress, to her hands desperately holding the fabric together, to the tears she was trying so hard not to shed. His expression went completely, utterly cold. "Mr. Ashford," Marcus said, stepping forward with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What a surprise. You were just humiliating my wife," Lucas said, his voice soft and deadly. "Please, continue. I'm fascinated to see how this ends." The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Elena saw Jessica's face go white, saw Marcus freeze mid-step, saw every single person who had laughed or whispered or filmed suddenly realize the magnitude of their mistake. Lucas crossed the room in 3 strides and shrugged out of his jacket. He draped it over Elena's shoulders with infinite gentleness, his fingers brushing against her bare skin for just a moment. The jacket was warm from his body and smelled like his cologne, familiar and safe. "Are you hurt?" he asked her quietly, and she shook her head, not trusting her voice. He pressed a soft kiss to her temple, a gesture so tender and intimate that it felt wrong for anyone else to witness. Then he turned back to face the room, and his expression was no longer cold, it was volcanic. "I want to make sure I understand the situation correctly," Lucas said, his voice carrying easily across the silent lounge. "My wife agreed to help a friend tonight by covering a shift, and while performing this act of kindness, she was insulted, assaulted, and humiliated. Is that accurate?" Nobody spoke. Jessica had backed up against the table, her earlier confidence evaporating. "I asked a question," Lucas said, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "It was a misunderstanding," Marcus tried, but his voice cracked. "A misunderstanding." Lucas smiled, and it was the most frightening expression Elena had ever seen on his face. "You misunderstood who she was, so you felt entitled to treat her like garbage. Is that what you're telling me?" "We didn't know," Jessica started, but Lucas cut her off with a look. "You didn't know," he repeated. "And if you had known, you would have treated her with respect. Which means you only offer respect to people you think are important. Is that the philosophy you live by?" Elena watched as her husband systematically dismantled them with nothing but words and presence. This was Lucas in full power, the man who had built an empire from nothing, who could destroy careers with a phone call. "The merger with Chen Industries," Lucas said, turning to Marcus, "is terminated. Effective immediately. You'll receive the formal paperwork on Monday, but consider this your notice. I don't do business with people who lack basic human decency." Marcus's face went gray. "Mr. Ashford, please, we can discuss." "There's nothing to discuss." Lucas pulled out his phone and made a call, never taking his eyes off Marcus. "James? I need you to pull all our contracts with Chen Industries. Every single one. And I want you to call Richard, Thomas, and Alexandra. Tell them what happened here tonight. See if they're interested in picking up the pieces when Chen Industries collapses. Because it will collapse." He ended the call and looked at Jessica. "As for you, I believe you mentioned working in PR?" Jessica nodded mutely, her face now the color of chalk. "Not anymore," Lucas said simply. "I'll be making some calls about that as well." "You can't do this," Jessica whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. "I can. And I am." Lucas wrapped his arm around Elena's waist, pulling her close against his side. "You wanted to teach someone a lesson tonight. Consider yourselves educated." He guided Elena toward the exit, and the crowd parted before them like water. She could feel everyone staring, could hear the furious whispered conversations starting behind them, but she kept her head high and her hand tight in Lucas's. As they reached the elevator, Elena finally looked back. She saw Jessica standing alone, her expensive dress and jewelry suddenly seeming cheap and tawdry. She saw Marcus on his phone, probably already trying to do damage control that would never be enough. And she saw the other guests, the ones who had laughed or filmed or simply watched in silence, all of them now realizing that they had witnessed something that would have consequences far beyond this single night. The elevator doors closed, and Lucas immediately turned to her, his hands cupping her face with infinite care. "I am so sorry," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I should have been here. I should have protected you from—" "You couldn't have known," Elena interrupted, but tears were finally spilling down her cheeks. "I told you I was helping Sophia. You thought I was safe. You're never truly safe when you're out of my sight, Lucas said, and kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. And that kills me. That I can't shield you from every cruel person in this city. I didn't need shielding, Elena said, finding strength in her anger now. I needed to see it. To really see how people behave when they think someone is beneath them. Lucas pulled back slightly, studying her face. What are you thinking? Elena looked at her reflection in the polished elevator wall. Her makeup was smudged from tears, her hair was falling out of its simple bun, and Lucas's jacket hung off her shoulders over her torn dress. She looked like exactly what Jessica had accused her of being, someone broken, someone defeated. But she didn't feel defeated. She felt furious. I'm thinking, Elena said slowly, that Marcus Chen and Jessica whatever her name is just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They did, Lucas agreed. And they're going to pay for it. The elevator reached the ground floor, and Lucas guided her toward the private car waiting at the curb. But Elena stopped before they reached it, turning to look back at the building towering above them, all glass and steel and uncompromising luxury. Not just them, she said quietly. Everyone in that room who laughed. Everyone who filmed. Everyone who stood by and did nothing while someone was being humiliated. Lucas was silent for a moment, and when she looked at him, she saw pride and love and something darker in his eyes. What do you want to do? He asked. Elena smiled, and it was not a kind smile. I want them to understand what they did, Elena said. I want them to feel it. They drove home in silence, Lucas's hand never leaving hers. Their penthouse apartment occupied the top 3 floors of a building overlooking Central Park, a space filled with art and light and memories. But tonight, Elena barely noticed the familiar beauty as they rode the private elevator up. Sophia was waiting in the lobby of their building, her face stricken with guilt. She'd obviously gotten word about what happened, probably from another staff member. Elena, I'm so sorry, Sophia began, tears in her eyes. I never should have asked you to. Sophia, stop. Elena pulled her into a hug, careful not to let Lucas's jacket slip. This wasn't your fault. You needed help and I was happy to give it. What happened after was not your responsibility. But your dress is just a dress, Elena said firmly, even though her heart ached thinking about it. Your daughter is what matters. How is she? Better. The fever broke an hour ago. Sophia wiped her eyes. But Elena, they're saying that Mr. Ashford destroyed Marcus Chen's career tonight. That he made calls to every major investor in the city. Good, Elena said simply, and she was surprised by how much she meant it. Upstairs, Lucas disappeared into his study to make more calls while Elena stood in their bedroom, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. She carefully removed his jacket and examined the torn dress. The damage was irreparable. The silk was shredded down the back, the delicate beading scattered across the floor. She remembered the night Lucas had given it to her. They'd been married for 6 months, and he'd surprised her with a weekend in Paris. The dress had been waiting in their hotel room with a note that said, "For my wife, who makes beauty look effortless." They'd worn it to a charity gala at the Louvre, and she'd felt like a princess in a fairy tale. Lucas had whispered in her ear all night, telling her she outshone every piece of art in the building. Now it was ruined because someone had decided she wasn't worth basic human respect. Elena carefully removed the dress and put on comfortable clothes, soft pants and one of Lucas's old Harvard shirts that she'd claimed as her own years ago. She pulled her hair into a messy bun and washed the smudged makeup from her face. When she looked in the mirror again, she saw herself clearly for the first time in hours. She wasn't broken. She was angry. And anger, she was learning, could be a remarkably clarifying emotion. She found Lucas in his study, sitting behind his desk with his laptop open and his phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking in the calm, measured tone he used when he was systematically dismantling someone's world, and she loved him fiercely in that moment. When he saw her, he ended the call immediately. "How many?" she asked. "How many what? How many calls have you made?" Lucas leaned back in his chair, studying her. 12. I've spoken to every board member of Chen Industries, 3 major shareholders, and the CEOs of 5 companies that Marcus was courting for partnerships. By Monday morning, he'll be facing votes of no confidence from his own board. And Jessica? She was a junior PR associate at Morrison & Blake. Was being the operative word. They've terminated her contract effective immediately. She'll also find that her name has been circulated to every major firm in the city as someone with severe professional judgment issues. Elena absorbed this information, feeling a complicated mix of satisfaction and something that might have been guilt. That's pretty comprehensive destruction. They destroyed something precious to me, Lucas said quietly. They hurt you, made you feel small and scared. I will not tolerate that. I know. Elena moved around the desk and sat on the edge of it, facing him. But I need you to stop making calls for tonight. Lucas frowned. Why? Because this isn't just your fight. It's mine too. And I need to be part of the solution, not just someone you're protecting. He was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. What do you want to do? Elena had been thinking about this during the car ride home, during the elevator up, during every moment since Lucas's jacket had settled over her shoulders. She'd been thinking about power and perception, about how people treated you based on what they thought you were worth. I want to go back, she said. Absolutely not. Lucas stood immediately, his expression fierce. You're not going anywhere near that place or those people again. Lucas, listen to me. Elena took his hands, grounding them both. They humiliated me because they thought I was powerless. They thought I was nobody. I want to show them exactly who I am, but I want to do it my way. Which is? Elena smiled. The Grand Azure is hosting their annual charity gala next weekend. $5,000 a plate, all the major players in the city. We've been invited, remember? Understanding dawned in Lucas's eyes, followed immediately by concern. Elena, I don't think that's a good idea. Seeing them again so soon is exactly what I need to do, she interrupted. But not as your wife who needs protection. As myself. As someone who has her own power and her own voice. Lucas was quiet for a moment, then pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and sure. You're one of the strongest people I know, he said into her hair. But I hate that you have to be strong about this. I hate that they hurt you. I know. But they did, and now I have to decide what to do about it. She pulled back to look at him. Will you trust me? Always, he said without hesitation. What do you need? Over the next week, Elena put her plan into motion. She called in favors from connections she'd made over the years, spoke to journalists she'd befriended at various events, and reached out to other women who had experienced similar treatment in the elite circles of Manhattan. What she discovered shocked her. Jessica wasn't an anomaly, she was a symptom of a much larger problem. Story after story came out, tales of staff being mistreated, of people being judged and dismissed based on their appearance or perceived status. Some of the stories made what happened to Elena look mild in comparison. She compiled everything into a detailed report, documenting patterns of behavior across multiple establishments. Then she sent it to the board that oversaw the Grand Azure and several other exclusive venues. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 3 managers were put on administrative leave pending investigation. New policies were drafted regarding staff treatment. And the Grand Azure issued a public statement condemning the incident and promising a complete review of their procedures. But Elena wasn't done. On the night of the gala, she dressed with care. She wore a gown that Lucas had commissioned specially for her, deep emerald green that brought out the gold in her brown eyes, with a back that was tastefully cut but impossible to tear. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo, diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, and she looked every inch the billionaire's wife. But more importantly, she felt like herself. Not scared, not small, not powerless. Just Elena, a woman who had learned that dignity couldn't be taken from you unless you gave it away. The Grand Azure's ballroom was transformed for the gala, dripping with crystal chandeliers and white roses. The same VIP lounge where she'd been humiliated was now part of the event space, and Elena felt a grim satisfaction as she and Lucas walked through it. Marcus Chen was there, looking diminished somehow despite his expensive tuxedo. His company was hemorrhaging money and investors, and rumors said he'd be voted out by his own board within the month. He saw Elena and Lucas enter and immediately turned away, disappearing into the crowd. Jessica was not in attendance, which didn't surprise Elena. She'd heard through the grapevine that Jessica had left the city entirely, moving back to whatever small town she'd originally come from. But many of the other guests from that night were present, and Elena could see the recognition in their eyes as they spotted her. Some looked ashamed. Others looked nervous. A few looked defiant, as if they still didn't understand what they'd done wrong. Elena didn't approach any of them. She didn't need to. She simply existed in the space, radiant and confident, while Lucas stayed at her side like a quiet promise of protection if she needed it. Halfway through the evening, the event coordinator approached Elena nervously. "Mrs. Ashford, we wanted to apologize again for what happened last week. It was unacceptable, and we've implemented new protocols to ensure it never happens again." "I appreciate that," Elena said graciously. "But I'd like to say something to the room if that's possible." The coordinator looked startled but nodded quickly. "Of course, we can arrange that immediately." 10 minutes later, Elena stood on the small stage at the front of the ballroom, a microphone in her hand and hundreds of eyes on her. Lucas was in the front row, his expression proud and protective. "Good evening," Elena began, her voice steady. "Many of you don't know me, even though you've seen me at events like this for years. I'm Elena Ashford, and I want to tell you about something that happened to me recently." She told the story simply and directly, without embellishment or drama. She described agreeing to help a friend, working as a waitress, and being treated as less than human because of what people assumed about her worth. "I was lucky," she continued. "Lucky that I had someone who could stand up for me. Lucky that I had resources and connections to fight back. But there are hundreds of people working in places like this who aren't lucky, who get treated terribly every single day and have no recourse, no voice, no power to change their situation." The ballroom was utterly silent now, every person hanging on her words. "I'm not telling you this story to embarrass anyone or to seek sympathy," Elena said. "I'm telling you this because I want you to think about how you treat people when you think nobody's watching. When you think someone can't fight back. When you think someone doesn't matter." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Everyone matters," she said simply. "Everyone deserves basic dignity and respect, regardless of what they do or how much money they have or what they can do for you. That's not radical. That's just being human." She stepped away from the microphone to absolute silence. For a heartbeat, she worried that she'd miscalculated, that her message had fallen flat. Then Lucas started clapping, slow and deliberate. Sophia joined him from where she stood near the service entrance, tears streaming down her face. And then, like a wave, the entire ballroom erupted into applause. Elena saw tears in some eyes, shame in others, thoughtfulness in many. She saw the coordinator openly weeping, and several of the service staff hugging each other near the back of the room. As she stepped off the stage, Lucas was there to take her hand. He didn't say anything, just looked at her with such love and pride that her own eyes filled with tears. If this story touched your heart, we have so many more emotional journeys waiting for you on this channel. Have you ever been misjudged based on your appearance, and how did you handle it? If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our next powerful story. Thanks for loving Reddit Storyteller.